Hi, I want to tell you a story, but it's true. I don't like the word story because it sounds like it's made up. But I was asked by a magazine on the Costa del Sol in southern Spain to write an article about how I met Bob Marley. It wasn't in Jamaica, that's the point. And it wasn't in Kingston town. It was in Kingston Upon Thames, here in the United Kingdom. How I met Bob Marley. Well, this is amazing because I was introduced to Bob Marley by Johnny Nash, and that would have been around 1972 when we were at the Howard Conder Music Centre, because we supplied a custom audio console for Johnny Nash, and we supplied a lot of the kit for his UK tour at that time. And so Johnny Nash was doing an album for CBS, and it was entitled I Can See Clearly Now. You remember that? This proved to be a huge success, this record, and we supplied all the kit for it. That was for CBS Records. That album sold 7 million records. Still being played today in all the radio stations all over the world. And we were renting the musical equipment to Johnny Nash. As I said, he was signed to CBS Records. That was another client of ours for renting equipment. What happened, Johnny Nash brought Bob Marley over from Jamaica whilst he was doing this album with CBS Records, and I Can See Clearly Now, as I said, was a huge success. And I think Johnny Nash was trying to get a deal for Bob Marley with his own label, CBS label. But what happened, CBS turned Bob down. Can you believe it? Incredible, isn't it? And Bob wrote a couple of the tracks on that album. I think it was Stir It Up was one of them, Guava Jelly, another one, and maybe some others as well. But Bob Marley was over from Jamaica to the UK, and as I said, he was hoping to get a recording contract with CBS. Oh, fancy turning him down. That's incredible. But you know, also the Wailers and Bob Marley were rehearsing in our music centre for around about 1 to 2 months. And it was just an amazing time, really. And but I loved reggae. I still love reggae, by the way. And I remember having my own little recording studio up in the music centre there. And I never ever got time to use it. Had a 4-track recording studio upstairs, but Bob used the space to rehearse with the Wailers, and so yeah. Let's get together and feel all right. And that particular place in Kingston now has been turned into an apartment. I'd love to try and go and see it one day. Anyway, CBS turning it down, but you know what? He went to Island Records, and Chris Blackwell loved the music, and I'm just not at all surprised. I actually got to know a little bit about the man Bob Marley because we were dealing with him on a daily basis. I met him most days that he was working there. And, as I say, I love the rhythm very much. And the drummer of the Wailers, I asked him to show me, the one-drop beat with the kick drum coming down on the off beat instead of on the first beat in the bar. And before long, I got onto the drum kit with the Wailers, and I was actually getting the hang of the one drop, and that was great memories to have. I really loved that. I just loved reggae. And I remember asking the drummer of the Wailers to show me the one drop. Boom, boom. So with the kick drum, a little bit different to how I'd normally been playing it, I asked actually, would you show me how to do this? And he put me on the kit, and I played along with him. Oh, all good fun. It's great fun. Great memories. And it's worth mentioning here that Johnny Nash was a delight to work with, as well as Bob. Great memories. So that's my account of meeting Bob Marley and of course Johnny Nash. But it's from Kingston, Jamaica to Kingston Upon Thames. To me, one of the most important characteristics of Bob Marley was his spiritual discernment and his insight into the history of mankind, that we were first created from the beginning with a purpose, and he also saw into the future. Bob understood what our eventual destiny could be and was going to be. And in the meantime, no matter what we go through in this life, he sang the most popular song of all time, One Love. And it's in there, let's get together and feel all right.
Let's get together and feel all right.
If I recite some of the lyrics for you from One Love, you will see that Bob really was a preacher. So the Howard Conder Music Centre was on 3 floors at number 8 Eden Street. It was formerly a furniture shop. And it also had the top floor on the premises next door. So we had the 3 floors on number 8, and also the next door to the left, we had the top floor. So it's huge. We took out a 21-year lease on the premises. The workshop, by the way, that was next door, that's where Roger Giffin worked from. Roger Giffin is a world-renowned guitar maker. Well, he started working from home, but then he came and worked out of our place. His clients include Eric Clapton, Pete Townsend, Jimmy Page, and also we're going to put a link on there for you. Watch some of his videos and what he does, and therefore get in touch with him. As my wife and I were extremely busy running Condor Enterprises, which was the rental company, we didn't want to be managing the new music store, and therefore I went into partnership with my brother-in-law, Derek Ratcliffe, and we formed a limited company to handle all the new retail aspects of the music business. For example, the sales side of guitars or drums or woodwind, strings, sheet music, and any other musical retail business. But meanwhile, Annette, my wife then, and we still ran Condor Enterprises, which handled all the rental business. But when we opened the music centre, what was that? Must have been around 1970. We had 14 members of staff, and the premises looked amazing. I wanted really my brother-in-law to handle all the sales and handle the music business as such. And Derek had come from a background of being a Woolworths store manager, very much like my father, who was, before he was paralysed, was a Woolworths manager as well. So they had the ability to look after and run a business. Amongst many of the famous music artists that used to do business with us, and that was, as I was saying earlier, Bob Marley, Johnny Nash, Small Faces. We had the guy from the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards. He lives in Kingston as well. Lots of people came to the music store. Well, the next big event in our lives with my first wife, Annette, is the birth of our son, Miles. That was in 1975, I think February the 10th. This event brought great joy to us as a family, as it was so lovely to have a girl, our firstborn, Charlotte, and a boy. And yeah, but you know, it was very hard for me. You know, it's very hard for me to talk about my first marriage because obviously, yeah, it's hard. But anyway, let me just try and explain, obviously from my side, how it all went wrong. It was, first of all, very devastating to our 2 children, Charlotte and Miles. And the time was around about 1985. By now, I had remarried, and I remember getting a letter from Annette, my first wife, and we were living in America at the time, and I'd written to her first, and I realised, you know, a few years into the marriage, I said, oh, look, you know, I was sorry for causing such pain to her and also to the children, Charlotte and Miles, and I remember clearly Annette responded and wrote back and was so gracious as she wrote that it wasn't all your fault, Howard, were her words. That was such a comfort to me. But sadly, our daughter Charlotte whom I cherish so much. You know, she was daddy's girl, as most girls are daddy's girls, you know. And this is now my estranged daughter, and has been estranged for the last 40 years. Charlotte has not been able to come to terms or be at peace with her parents' divorce, and sadly is not in contact with me at all. Charlotte's husband wrote a very harsh letter to me several years ago, just about the time I launched Revelation TV. Well, it was very painful reading that letter, and her husband had said that I was to stay away from her, and that Charlotte would only believe in God if I was to fall under one of those London buses that I'd put the quotes of Jesus on, and if I was killed by such a bus, then she would believe in God. Don't quite understand that, but that's her feelings, and that's very sad to me. This is something that it's just hard to deal with, that, isn't it? And I'm sure some people sadly will be able to relate to it. Lesley and our two sons, Luke and Joel, came back from living in America, and this would be around 1991. We were attending the Isha-based Cornerstone Church, and I was part of the worship team. And it was during a time of praise and worship that the Lord spoke to me and said very clearly, "Leave immediately and go to see your estranged daughter." That's Charlotte, yeah? She happened to live nearby to where the church was, and this was, I was in Isha at that time, in Cornerstone. So without hesitation, I sneaked out of the church service. I knocked on Charlotte's front door, and being a Sunday, and it was morning obviously, about 11 o'clock I think probably, Charlotte opened the bedroom window, looked down outside and just said, "Oh, shoo, go away." And I was walking away, and I said to the Lord, "Please, Lord, don't hold this against Charlotte. I completely understand the way she feels, and please don't hold it against her." Well, what was amazing, the Lord spoke straight to me and said, "Howard, I'm going to give you another daughter. Yeah, you're going to have another child, and it's going to be a daughter." Wow. So when I got back to the church, and I waited for the church service to conclude, and I was there, I didn't say a word to anybody about what the voice of the Lord had said and what I'd said and what I'd encountered, the sort of hatred and things that had been poured into me by my daughter. And Lesley said to me several weeks later, well, I think it was probably 4 or 6 weeks later, she said, "You know what, I don't feel very well, I'm not very well, da 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 da." And I said, this is where I blurted it out, I said, "You're pregnant." Lesley looks at me, she said, "You know I can't be pregnant." This is because she'd had several miscarriages, and the doctor said she would never be able to have any more children. So then I explained to her, for the first time, about the episode of what happened the day I went to see Charlotte, and that the Lord had spoken to me and said that he was going to give us another child, and it was going to be a daughter. Well, Lesley, just said, "Well, you know I can't be pregnant." I said, "Well, you are. You are pregnant, that's what I believe, and this is what God promised." Well, of course, that was confirmed, and 9 months later, or thereabouts, our daughter, Bethany, was born.
I thought it was physically impossible for her to go that length of time without sleeping, 15 hours. Was it just
like a dad.
I thought that as well, I thought that. Once I fed her tonight out at home, she starts screaming, I'll just put her up in the studio.
Yeah, she's gonna love music, she's gonna love it. She was dancing in the womb until she came out, she was all blue. Within 30 seconds she went pink.
It's amazing, they sort of had this thing with oxygen and they didn't put it on her, they just like whiffed this tube in front of her nose, just like that. And she obviously got a sniff of it, they didn't put anything inside her mouth. And then she just turned pink, like within seconds, it was amazing.
Such a miracle. Birth is such a miracle. Yes, we're already dedicated to God. Yesterday, lifted her up and prayed.
Yeah, Robert, Rory did that.
Feel, you know, that she's having to cope with 3 of them, you know, it's not just sort of the cooking and everything, it's just, you know, coping with everything, you know, and she has to be a referee with the boys, you know, with them arguing and I've had enough now.
You feel good?
Yeah, fine, absolutely fine.
Feel like another one?
No, no more, no, absolutely not.
The end of my first marriage led me to marrying Lesley, and you all know Lesley, many of you. I really need to explain some more about my 14-year marriage to Annette and how that failed. And to be fair, Annette and I both married far too young. We were both only 19 years of age. We both came from a similar sort of background where we both needed love and stability or some sort of calm in our lives. We were both very young and very needy people, and we didn't have what I would say was a strong father figure in our lives as we were growing up. And my father was dead, but Annette's dad or father was a hypochondriac, and he did little to create a positive atmosphere within the family. And when Annette and I parted, we had 2 properties, a Georgian house in the Esher area and an apartment in Kingston Upon Thames. Therefore, we both had somewhere to go and to live, you know. Annette and I lived apart for some months before I met Lesley. It was when I attended my son Miles's parents' teachers' evening at his school that I first spoke to Lesley. She was Miles's teacher, ironically. This would have been around 1980, and a few days later, myself and a friend were at a wine bar in Kingston, opposite the Kingston College, near what is now the Kingston University, almost next door to it. And a friend of mine asked me if I would ever get married again. And if so, what would you look for in such a wife? For some strange reason, I began to describe my son's teacher, whom I'd only just spoken to a few days earlier at that parent-teachers evening. And although I had only spent no more than maybe 20, 30 minutes with Lesley, she impressed me enough for me to describe the sort of character and demeanour, and that was this particular teacher, and blow me down. Just as I was explaining this to my friend, Alan, in walks Lesley with her friend. And I said, Alan, she's here. And she walked right up to me and said, oh, hi, how are you doing? All right, you know, the usual thing. And I'm just looking in amazement. I think I just couldn't believe the timing and seeing her again, just as I was trying to describe her to my friend. And anyway, Lesley and I started seeing each other, you know, a couple of times a week, maybe sometimes once a week, because Lesley had her friends, I had mine. So meeting a couple of times a week suited both of us. It seemed that Annette, my estranged wife, wasn't in a hurry for our divorce to go through. So in fact, it took 2 more years to get that finalized. And this meant that Lesley and I couldn't get married, as was our intention. So I was still legally married to Annette, and this played on my mind a lot, especially as a young Christian. I thought this is not right. So I went to see Lesley's mum. And I spoke to her and I said, I want you to know that I'm still married and I need to stop seeing your daughter. I'm already trying to do that and get her through this, but I'm coming to you because I can see that she's becoming very distressed about this. So please, can you be ready to help your daughter through this period? And Lesley's mum replied, well, Lesley's very strong-willed, you know, and she more or less wished me good luck. Our separation lasted a week. Lesley was just so upset that I couldn't really put her through this separation, and so after about 2 years, my divorce finally came through. So Lesley and I were able to marry. And on October the 2nd, 1982, we were married. Soon after we were married, just a couple of months later, we actually went to live in America. We'd had a great time on a holiday there previously, and we went to Tampa, Florida. I was 36 years of age, and Lesley was 25, I think it was. And so it was about 11 years difference between us in age, you know. So I was very much into electronic music, and the sort of pop groups at the time were the Eurythmics, and they were topping the charts with Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. We took a lot of high-tech equipment with us. We had cutting-edge equipment like the Roland Jupiter 8. It's a very sought-after piece of kit even today. I think it was about £2,800 in those days. Wow. Today they're worth about 18,000 or something like that. Incredible, isn't it? But anyway, we had that, and we eventually had the famous Lindrum and lots of other high-tech equipment that were in the new era of the electronic music. So this formed part of our equipment list that we'd taken with us as well. We also had an 8-track audio recorder. That was the Allen and Heath, along with the desk, the Allen and Heath desk. It's quite a lot to pack into the 80s decade that we lived in and worked in Florida, but I'll try and keep it as short as possible. Okay, after finding a suitable and affordable property, we first needed to get planning permission, which we knew could be very difficult. For example, before we moved to America, we tried to find suitable music studio premises in the UK, and we were being continually turned down. A little bit of an anecdote again, worth mentioning to you, I think, hopefully. It's when we were finally giving up looking for studios in the UK because the planning department just gave us such a hard time here in the UK. And we were offered an underground toilet. An underground toilet was all that the Wandsworth planning authorities said that we could actually turn into a music studio. Actually, I won't be rude yet. I'm going to say something, but let me just tell you, I wrote to Prince Charles, who was at the time getting criticism in the press for saying that America was more helpful to new startup businesses than the UK was, and I wrote to the Prince to support what he was saying, that it was correct and that he had the right view. And it was exactly what we'd experienced when we first went to America, and that the local planners were so helpful to us in America, and they wanted to help us to set up our recording studios in Tampa. And when we first attended the planning meeting with the Tampa City Planning Authorities, they did say at first, okay, this isn't possible for you to do what you want to do with the premises that you're proposing. However, this is what we think will actually be possible. So they helped us with to gain planning permission, but this was totally different to what we were getting in the UK. And so when I was sharing all of this with Prince Charles in that letter, I thought it was going to help, you know, to defend what he was saying about, you know, how difficult it is to actually start up a business at that time in the UK. So it was sharing that with him. For us, when we set up in Tampa at that time, we were on South Howard Avenue. It's amazing. Every time I go set up somewhere, and it's nearly always has my name nearby. It's quite interesting. But anyway, we wanted this old building in what is called Hyde Park in South Tampa, and it was a beautiful area, but this place was really run down. And so we needed to turn it into a music studio, and at the same time, we needed to be able to live there. And I've got to say, I've never found any planning authority anywhere ever since we've been in America. And that was 35 years ago and more. And I would say, even in Spain, it's been difficult, and in the UK. So America is the place to go if you want to start a business. I also wrote, we'd been offered the planning permission of a disused toilet. I mentioned all of that to Prince Charles in that letter. And I said I thought they were taking the... But anyway, true to form, Prince Charles did reply, and in his inimitable style, of course. You can imagine, can't you?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Once the first studio had been set up and been built by our newfound friend, Bill Barber, and his particular crew had also recently moved to Florida from somewhere like Michigan, I think it was. And yes, there was so much to do, and not only did we need to renovate the whole house, but we also needed to build soundproofing and make suitable structures for the acoustic treatments, and also the music studio, just like the ones we have today. They should have separate drum booths, and they should have other creative areas that would suit various musical instruments, i.e. we had a harpist once coming in. We need a place where it was high enough for the harp and also the acoustic treatment around that, and then we had to have an area for the piano, which would have a different treatment, so it was more reflective in the room. So we did all of this, and we were very you know, sort of conscious that musicians, when they're in a creative mood, they need to be comfortable with their environment and all of this. So, yeah, and then we needed to live in the place as well. So we had a couple of bedrooms, a dining room, and other living accommodation that we needed to have created. It was, we were very fond of this particular studio that we built. It's one of the first that we built in America. We had a very special opening day for the studio. We had many interested musicians and singer-songwriters attend. They wanted to start recording with us on some of the projects they had, and so we needed to get stuck in as soon as possible. Turns out, thank God, our studios were very successful from day one. I was prepared for it to take a while, and before we could gain enough clients. And I was looking at doing some work in a local restaurant. That's a funny story as well. The local restaurant right next to us, unbeknown to me, was a very famous restaurant. Didn't have any windows. I had gone in to ask if I could be a waiter, should they have the need and everything. And when I saw inside and when I realized what I'd done, they said, "Sir, we have," who was the president at the time? President Nixon flies here to have lunch sometimes, or dinner. Oh, he said, "We train our waiters for 6 months before you can get a job here, sir." And I'm looking around, I'm going, I'm not surprised. I think it was something like a bottle of wine was anything from, I don't know, 100 to 3,000. It was called the Burns Steakhouse. I thought I was just going for a little waiter's job, but anyway. Fortunately, one time later on, a client of ours took us for dinner there, and I think it cost him several £100 in those days to pay the bill. But yeah, so we get to see it from a different perspective. But anyway, so I thank God that there was never a need for me to actually do any waiting or waitering. It was the end of one of the recording sessions that I realized that the keyboard player who was performing for a client was getting paid more than we got paid as a studio. You know, and I'm thinking, he's a keyboard player, he gets paid X amount, can't remember what it was, and we were only charging for our whole recording studio far less than what he was charging as a session musician. So that made me think. So when the band had gone, and I remember going up and sitting down at the keyboard, it was the electronic keyboard. And I just was trying to fiddle around, and I was doing some sort of rhythms as well with the drum machine and everything else. And it was quite an interesting little flow I was creating. Anyway, that was what really was the beginning of me writing a track which is now known today as Who's Gonna Save the World? So by my experimenting with these rhythms and sounds, I soon was able to record something and put something down, and then the next day I looked at it and I was starting to write some lyrics with it, and in the space of time I was able to finish it to a certain extent. I had it where I had no vocals on it, and here are some of the lyrics.
Tell me where we're gonna be in this space of time. Some will say it's gonna be the end of all mankind. Famines, wars and pestilence, earthquakes and crime. The love for one another is cooling off with time. So take me to your lead.
Well, it was almost the next day after I'd finished doing the music for this track that a client came in. Her name was Laura. Yeah, she just wanted to check out our new studios. Laura asked me, had I any recordings that I had made which were Christian? What? I'd never had anybody request that before. It was very unusual. A song or a track that was Christian? Okay, so, well, I said, it so happens that I'm just putting this track together. You might call it Christian because all the lyrics are taken from the Bible. So I played her the track of Who's Gonna Save the World, and she said, oh, I love that. My goodness, that's so powerful. Yeah, but I said, I've got no vocalist on it. And she said, well, she would do it. And she put the vocals on it. And this is a little bit what it sounded like.
Man has taken giant steps in technology, but will he ever get it right with ecology? Ozone layer and chemicals, pesticides and waste, to mention only just a few, to show why men's in haste. So take me to your lead.
Well, eventually we started getting more inquiries from other musicians in the Tampa Bay area. And again, for some reason, Christians were the ones coming into the studios like I'd never seen before. You know, it's worth noting that contemporary Christian music in America was very popular, whereas in the UK in the 1980s it was never heard of. You know, it was something that just was was not around. I believe it was the Lord who was directing me to these Christians, and he was drawing them to the studio. And I became more aware of this genre of music as contemporary Christian music, as it was called then. The next inquiry I get was another person. He was a young man. He came into the studios and he said, had I got something that I'd recorded there that was Christian? So I played Who's Gonna Save the World? By this time it had Laura's voice on it. Anyway, he was so impressed that he asked me for a copy of the tape, and I said, okay, why do you want it? He said, well, I'll take it to this local Christian radio station at Carpenter's home church. WCIE was the title of the broadcaster. Anyway, this went out and it played at late in the evening. I think it was crazy because he said it's going to be played at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I went, oh, prime time, eh? Anyway, so they played it, and Lesley and I were listening to it, sitting up in bed. Oh, yeah. And it introduced me to all the other sort of contemporary Christian music that was being played there, which was very impressive.
Who's gonna save the world? Who's gonna save the world? Who's gonna save the world? Who?
Anyway, the song was so popular that it remained at top of the charts, most requested song for 6 weeks. So this eventually led to me being interviewed by WCIE on their radio station. Wow, I can tell you what, I was so nervous. I almost passed out when being interviewed, and this was live on a radio show, and I can't even remember. It was all a fog. I was trying to think, what did I say when it was all over? And I think, did I make a fool of myself? Probably did. I don't know. It just was ridiculous. So anyway, so after only 1 year in America, we got some devastating news. Yeah. We were told that we had to return back to England. The USA Immigration Department had said that for some reason our lawyers had put our case to them for our visas to be there. They'd messed up, basically. And they said we had to go back to England and reapply for a special visa. It was a B2 visa. And that was devastating, because we just built this new studio. It was our home. And it meant that just because there was a mistake on the application form that our immigration lawyer had made, we were going to lose a lot of money. And it was meaning a lot of heartache, and we had to pack up, sell the studio and the equipment as much as possible. And we were selling at a really, I suppose, a forced sale, a fire sale they call it, don't it? You know, we were sort of like thinking, well, are we ever going to get the visa approved? Will we ever be able to return to America? That was a very difficult time. We were feeling very insecure, and as I said, we had to sell everything we'd built up, and it was financially disastrous for us, you know. So, but apart from all that, all the hard work we put into it, you know, we'd repainted the house, we'd done a lot of work to it, and put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it ourselves. But here we go. So it's the way it was, and we returned to the UK. The flight back, it was very long from Tampa in those days. I suffer a lot from jet lag. And what I did is I tried to stay awake all the following day, you know, after we landed early morning. And Lesley's very good, she can deal with that better. So I said, you know, I'm going to go to bed. It was dark, it was winter time, so it was probably about 7 o'clock. I just couldn't take it any longer. I had to go to sleep. So I was in one of the back bedrooms at the house in Thames, Lesley's mum's, as I said. And I was sort of saying to God, oh, you know, I thought it was okay, Lord. I thought this is something you wanted us to do, that had your stamp of approval on it, and that we were going to go and set up in America, and it was somewhere we wanted to start our new life with, and be amongst Christians who were very much outward in their faith. It wasn't like in England where everybody was a closet Christian. That's what I felt, you know. So I'm saying, Lord, I thought it was something you wanted us to do. And I'll tell you what, all of a sudden, a figure appeared in the bedroom, and it was standing by the door, and it was like a white light shining so brightly, but it was a figure of a being, a person. And I couldn't make out the face or anything because of the brightness that was coming. And then a voice said to me, Howard, everything's going to be all right. Do you know what? I was so scared. I think I must have passed out, because I woke up in the morning and I was trying to figure out what had happened. And I was wondering if I should share this encounter with Lesley, because Lesley is like just recently married. What's she going to think? I'm a religious nutter, delusional, a freak. Yeah, don't worry. I know some of you say I am. I can hear you, but don't worry. The thing is that a vision like had happened the night before, that's not something that ever happened to me before this. So I'm thinking, what do I do? Do I tell Lesley? So I'm in a quandary. Later on in the day, I said to Lesley, look, this is what happened. And so fortunately, she and I started to rationalize that experience and try to figure out what went on that last night. And so we went back upstairs to the bedroom about the same sort of time as I'd gone to bed, about 7 o'clock. Everything was dark. I was thinking, was it the moon shining on the door? But there's no moon. The moon's on the other side of the house. Was it a light? No, it can't be, because this bedroom backs onto a wood, so it's all dark. And then I suddenly thought, you know what am I trying to say? Lesley, there was a voice that said to me, Howard, everything's going to be all right. So the rationalizing of it came to an end right there and then, because you could think about, the lights and how it looks like a bright figure, but it's the fact the voice said to me, Howard, everything's going to be okay. So we accepted it as an answer to my questioning God as to why we had been told by the US immigration to return to the UK. I just said, okay, we're challenged. We believe everything was going to be okay in the end. And so, just as the voice had said. I immediately made an appointment at the American Embassy in London and began to apply for a visa that would allow us to return and live and work in America. And this took several months. And in 1984, we had our first child, Luke, who was born in Kingston Hospital. And this was during this period as we were applying for the visa. It was a fraught time, to be honest. And I did start to have my doubts if this was ever going to be successful, and I was getting quite depressed about it. But then I had more than one interview with the embassy staff at the American Embassy, and they were keen to find out more and more. And eventually the American Embassy in London granted us the B2 visas, which had to be renewed every 2 years. So it meant every 2 years we had to leave America and come back to the UK and apply again for a new renewal of the visa, which we did several times because we were there nearly a decade, so yeah. But the second time we came to get our B2 visa renewed, our second son was born, Joel. And Joel was also born in Kingston Hospital. And so both of our sons were conceived in America, but they were born in the UK. But it didn't make any difference. No one in the family had a right to live and work in the USA, except by having these B2 visas. Eventually, we were again granted visas each time, as I said, and we continue to run our music recording studio in Tampa. Eventually, we had the most amazing kit list that any electronic studio would have dreamt of. We had everything. We were spending, in those days, several $1,000s every month, which kept us ahead of the game. We had such a lot of clients. We were earning good money. And that's why we were able to spend, $2,000 or $3,000 a month just on kit list. And we were there nearly 10 years, so you can imagine how our kit list grew. Our studios were nearly always booked, and I thank God that we lacked for nothing. Yeah. The 1980s was a very exciting time to be in the music business, and as you can see from the photos, all the kit that we had in and out of our studios was just amazing. We tried to share the studios at one stage with a couple of interested parties. I have to say I do regret the way in which it ended, as the two guys were really good people and I'm sure I should have handled it in a better way than I did. I'm so sorry. We then set up a studio in our home as the garage was large enough. As we know, American garages are very large, and we successfully converted it, and it worked well, you know, we did it well. We also bought the very first Apple Mac, and we used to use it for recording instruments, and that was able to then be laid back straight onto tape. So it was a new way of sequencing, as it's called, through that particular method. It was very much high-tech in those days. I still had new clients, and some were from as far as Cuba, I remember, doing some of that great music. The Latin beat, you know, is really good.
Se acerca el momento de irme con él. Yo no me quedo, me voy con él. Y la casa el joven que sigue en pie. Yo no me quedo, me voy con él. Toditos los valientes que han sido fieles.
And another client that we had that used to record in Nashville, her name was Johnny Nash, recorded Stronger Than Before with us. And a few other clients like Parade in Paris, Bruce Spurgeon, she recorded a cover version of Wind Beneath My Wings. And in the final months of the Condors living in America, a young man who was an R&B songwriter introduced himself as Fitzgerald Scott, but he insisted that we call him Scott. Scott was initially a client of ours who, like other clients, paid us to record his music, and Scott was around 20 years of age, maybe 21, a little bit older. And when he first started to put his music ideas down onto tape in our studios, he seemed to come in at the end or the beginning of the month, just at the time he would have been paid. And that's something we would work together on his demos.
We've been through our ups and downs.
And one day Scott said to me when he'd run out of money, and bless him, and he said, I'm going to have to stop doing these recording sessions because you know, he just couldn't afford it anymore. Well, I had this impression, right or wrong, and I could see that Scott was a bit peeved. Yeah, he was very disappointed, to say the least, that he couldn't afford to carry on with his demos. So I got the distinct impression, as I was saying, looking at me and thinking, and I was looking at him, and I got this impression that it was something like this, right? White boy, me, all the kit, no musical talent. He, black boy, all the talent, and no money. I felt this so strongly that I said to Scott, I said, you know what? You picked the wrong guy, Scott. I am going to help you to finish your project, so don't worry about paying the money right now. And I worked with Scott for the next 18 months. Well, at least once a week, probably twice or 3 times a week, because I know Lesley was very concerned. I was doing all this time for free in a way, and I can understand that because it also meant that I was spending less time with her and the family. But it was around this time also that I felt led to buy a professional video camera, a tripod and a special video recorder. Now, the cost was, wait for it, $50,000. Yes, $50,000. I wanted to learn how to interview interesting people and eventually make documentaries. That's what I had in mind. So I started getting used to the camera when Scott was in the studios, and I was just trying to get shots of him and everything. But I didn't know about lighting.
Why don't you give me a copy to get my mother? Just to make her dance.
So the shots that you're going to see of Scott are probably the first time they would have ever been aired, and hopefully they'll go out to everyone else across the world, people who know Scott, because I'm going to tell you what happened to him in a minute. Anyway, the thing is that the videos are a little bit dark, but as I say, it is our Scott.
Tell me, baby, I'm still the one.
I will also go more into why and how Lesley and I went into full-time ministry, which meant giving up our London music studios. And this also meant telling Scott that we need to wrap up what we're doing together with the music that we were making together. So this led to Scott making contact with Keith Sweat's management company in New York. They sent down to our studios in Tampa the man who's on the left of the video, as you can see, and he was trying to make the copies of Scott's music from my tapes onto his tapes. So with this done and dusted, we were now closer to our next venture, which I will share with you. I need to fast forward a couple of decades at this point, and I need to explain when I heard from Fitzgerald Scott in 1989 when I last saw him, and I was to hear from him again 2010, I think it was, yeah. In that time that he and I parted company, Scott had got in touch with me, and he began by making phone calls to the studios in New Malden and sending me emails. And here are some of the extracts that he was writing to me at the time.
It's gonna be me. It's gonna be me that finds the better way. I tried on the wall, but it's hard to get out, and the wait is long.
It was so good to hear from him again after all those years. He just wanted to come back and help me. He said to me on the phone, you know, it's payback time. I told him everything he knew, and he said that I'm a loyal person and I want to repay in some way for what he did for me to start me off in the music business. And he is one of the top R&B songwriters of that time and that period. His best multi-million record seller was Keith Sweat's track, Nobody.
Who can love you like me? Nobody. Who can fix you like me? Nobody. Who can treat you
very determined, you can see from all the emails and things, to come to Spain. But I hadn't heard from him for a while, and we were all set to, have him come over to London and also to Spain. And I suddenly heard from my son, one of my sons, that Scott had died. And he was only 49 years of age. And I just couldn't get over it. I really wept. And I find myself being just emotional about him every time I think about him, really. He was such a good lad. He was the son of a preacher.
I saw you in a dream, but how could this be, baby? You were calling out for me, and I was waiting there, ready to share and give you all of my love, 'cause you are my destiny. I know your love showed me.
Having heard that Scott had died, and I'm thinking about it, and I thought, do you know what? I'm going to try and get in touch with the person who's looking after my tapes. By now, they're quite old. Last time I recorded Scott was 1989. So here I am in 2014, trying to get hold of the tapes. It was my lawyer in America, in Tampa, a guy called Dale Gabbard. I got in touch with him and I said, look, Dale, I want to try and get hold of the tapes and see if I can do something about them, because I'd heard that you can have them specially baked, and then you can actually digitally take off the recordings and have them in a digital format rather than a tape format. And so I could retrieve these, hopefully, and start to work on some of the songs and tracks that we made back in 1988 and 89. And so, and I want you, viewers and people that connected with us, to be able to hear Scott's tracks, as it were, from beyond the grave. And I hope that this will happen very soon.